Erev Tov Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live, and today, friends, we're going to be covering several key issues in our news broadcast this evening. We'll be also talking in regards to white phosphorus that was used once again in Syria, and I do need to warn you in advance before we get to that segment of the broadcast. Keep in mind there is one image I will share with you. It's very disturbing. I'm not saying that this is the image from that case, but it'll give you an idea of what happens to children that are hit with white phosphorus, because white phosphorus has been alleged to be used in a populated area of civilians with women and children who also were affected by this. It's not considered a chemical in warfare terms, but it really is, because it is horrendous what it does to the victims. We're going to be doing some different things. One good news report going to be sharing with you this evening, but also be talking a little bit about what is going on Patreon. Something we're just now starting, and I'm going to be sharing you a little insight of that this evening and why we are doing this. And so it's going to be something that's going to really touch the hearts this evening. We'll be also sharing with you the website, how you can come to the conference in Kansas City, Kansas. Actually, it's a suburb of Kansas City, Kansas, in Shawnee, Kansas. We're posting that information. It's on our website, IsraeliNewsLive.org, as well as conference.IsraeliNewsLive.org as well. Be giving you all that information so that you can come be a part of this. And we are actually looking to see if we can make this a 2-day conference. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. May end up having to keep it as 1 day, but it is definitely going to have a lot of information inside of that. So let's get started. Again, keep in mind, if you have small children, and we're going to be on about our fourth frame of our news here, or actually fifth frame. Please keep in mind, do not let them see the images that we'll be sharing with you here on an attack that has happened inside of Syria. Now, Al Jazeera is reporting Pope Francis reportedly visiting North Korea in the coming months. Legislators suggest Pontiff wants to visit the isolated nation soon, the first time a pope will travel to North Korea. And as we know from Alberto Rivera, the former Jesuit that left the Catholic Church, said that the Pope never goes to any country unless the Vatican has conquered that country. So I thought it was kind of interesting to hear that Pope Francis is planning on going there. It says Pope wants to visit North Korea in the coming months. A South Korean official said on Monday, a further sign the isolated nation is opening up to the world. Well, he's only opening it up because they have finally come to some sort of agreement there. So that'll be an interesting sight to see. And I also found it interesting because on Lorenzo's website, already-happened.com, is sharing some insights there. U.S. maintains military diplomatic pressure on North Korea and South Korea, deploying assets in and around the peninsula. October 15th, 2018, that's of course today. Lorenzo was releasing these images here, and I'll play this. This is on his Twitter account right here. He was showing the tanks being moved around, being redistributed, the assets of the U.S. military in and around South and North Korea's borders there, letting North Korea know, stay on track or else, because we do have our assets deployed in the region, and at a moment's notice, we can make those changes happen if need be. So I thought it was kind of interesting that Lorenzo shared some of these things here on his website, alreadyhappened.com. Always interesting to see some of the things that Lorenzo shares there on his website there. All right, now also before I turn to other news, I want to share with you here. Let me just pause that video. It's already stopped. Okay, good. Want to share with you what we're doing over on patreon.com/Israeli News Live. And it's a place that you definitely want to go. We get into very sensitive issues. And I am starting to do a series now about the crimes that have been done against the Jewish people. And unfortunately, it comes in a very awkward position. It comes against those Zionists and those leaders of the Jewish Congress, affecting some of the leaders of Israel in past as well as even moving into the present tense, that have been families that have been found evidence, overwhelming evidence of their guilt and contributing, whether it be silence, indirectly or directly, in the deaths of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. I say these things to you, and I know what I'm about to say is a very sensitive nature, but you have to understand, even in my own family, we lost thousands of family members in the Holocaust. And any Holocaust surviving family will tell you there is nothing more important to them than bringing those to justice that have committed the crimes against humanity. And all through Israel's history, if they found out that there was a German that was part of the concentration camps or something of that effect that was ordering the mass execution of Jews, this was something that was always tried to be brought to trial, the person to be brought to justice, so that could be dealt with in the proper means and ways there. War crimes, literally war crimes that were being committed. But however, few people really know the truth of what has gone on, the crimes that were committed against the Jewish people under the banner of Zionism. And unfortunately, I have to bring this out because, one, it's never stopped. It continues even to this day. There are still crimes being committed under the name of Zionism. It may not be directly at the Jews per se right now, but the Jews will pay the heavy price in the long run. Because as we know, biblically speaking, 2/3 of the nation of the Hebrews is to be killed in a battle that will come up in the near future when the nations come against Israel. Well, that may be very well perpetrated by our own Zionist leaders. And unfortunately, as we look through Israel's history and the power struggles that have gone on, and I know firsthand report from some families that I know from Israel that lived during the time of the war in 48, the Independence War, just how much involved certain families were to make sure that they were in power in this nation, and no other family ever got in power. At one point, I even thought that Menachem Begin was the only decent prime minister ever to reach power in Israel because he was not under the control of the Vatican, only to discover in the investigative work that we have been doing that he too was very much involved in some of the most heinous crimes that affected the Jews that were inside of Europe during the Holocaust. And not only that, the crimes that were committed against American citizens as a result of Zionist leaders. When I say Zionist leaders, this is not the Jewish people. What I'm trying to share with you is that many innocent people have died as a result. We have to ask ourselves the question, why was there never a single investigation ever conducted over the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers? Why was there no true investigation done? We saw the planes crash into the building, and immediately, all the way over into England there, when there were certain Zionist leaders there, they were already declaring that this was done by Osama bin Laden, the Al-Qaeda affiliates. And they were the ones that were responsible. So therefore it became a declared decree by President Bush to be able to wage war, which put a stop to any criminal investigation ever being brought in the 9/11 attacks. But yet there are some very strange things that happened around 9/11, and many people are aware of this. But all this stuff keeps getting brushed under the rug. I've even been told it should not even be brought up now. It's like water under the bridge. But the problem is, if we don't begin to address the things that have happened in the past, and I'm not talking about a very distant past either, whether it be the things that have happened back before the Second World War in Nazi Germany, whether it be the transfer agreement, which the book that was written by that was written by a very a devout Jewish man who has his parents were Holocaust survivors, that shows the collaboration between the Nazis and the Zionists. In fact, the Jerusalem Post did an article here, dates here, September 23rd, 2009, when Zionists made a deal with the Nazis. Yeah, they did. To transfer their assets to Israel, or as they called it then, Palestine. They collaborated with the Nazis and forced the Americans not to bring about sanctions against Hitler so that the state of Israel could be created. This is one reason when all the Jews that came to Israel that finally did start making it into the country, they began to wonder, why is there so many German goods inside of Israel? German buses, German cars, everything German, and yet the Germans were the very ones that were putting them to death under Hitler's regime. It really was a bewilderment to most Jews. Well, it was because the Zionists had made a deal with the Nazis. I am kind of blown away, though, when I read some of these articles, how they cover up what really did happen. But there are many that have spoken up. There are many rabbis and many different Jews, both secular, both religious, that have spoken up about the crimes. And the one book that I've been reading, which I've been sharing with a lot of people, is this book right here. And it's called The Holocaust: Victims Accused. There's a lot of factual information in here, and all you have to do is cross-reference this information to find out how much truth is really there. So I'm going to share with you tonight in our news broadcast a little bit about this so that you can see for yourself what I'm talking about. This man right here, Rudolf Verba, who was a chemist during World War II. He was a teenager. He ended up being captured and he was put in Auschwitz, but he escaped from Auschwitz. Well, if you just read the Wikipedia report here, or if you read some articles that you would find online, you would think that this man, when he escaped, he told the authorities about what was happening in Auschwitz, and as a result, within a few months, all the deaths ended, and of course, he was considered to be the man that saved a total of 200,000 Jews as a result of his bravery. It says here, he was a Slovak Jewish biochemist who, as a teenager in 1942, was deported to the Auschwitz concentration camp in Germany-occupied Poland. He became known for having escaped from the camp in April of 1944 at the height of the Holocaust, and for having co-written a detailed report about the mass murder that was taking place there. Distributions of the report is credited with having halted the mass deportation of Hungary's Jews to Auschwitz in July of 1944, saving more than 200,000 lives. After the war, Verba trained as a biochemist, working mostly in England and Canada. Now that makes it look like, wow, great guy. And he was a great man, I will tell you that. But what's interesting is how that Wikipedia or many of the other places that you would read articles about Rudolf Verba never tell you the real truth of what went on. Well, I'm going to share with you, and this book here, of course, was written by Rabbi Moshe Schoenfeld, and it has a tremendous amount of sources in here that tell you what really happened. And the reason why I say it's important is because I'm seeing the same crimes that were committed back during the Holocaust, before the Holocaust, after the Holocaust, are still being committed today. And the reason for it is because the exact same people are in power, or descendants of the people that are in power in times past. And we are working on an entire series here that will unveil a lot of that information. But it also, like I said, it stems even into 9/11 that happened in this country, the United States, to bring us to war in the Middle East. It continues to happen. Even the sinking of the Patria, which was a ship that was sunk. And when that ship was sunk, the Patria, it cost the lives of 267 Jews that were on board, and it was done by the Zionist movement. Now, of course, the Zionists, if you look at the apologetics that are written there, said that they were doing this in order to get the British to let the Jews come in. That's the apologetic sides. If you look at the Jews that are witnesses to it, though, they accuse the Zionists of murdering their own people and for a political purpose for the state of Israel. It's very interesting. I want to read to you a little bit about Rudolf Verba here from this book so you'll get a better idea of what's going on. It says here, and I'm going to real quick because you may want to stop your video later and come back and look at this here so you can see it for yourself, all right? And then you could just freeze frame the video, and then you could read this for yourself. This book is no longer in publication, all right? They're not going to allow this book to be in publication. But I want you to be able to freeze the frame, and hopefully you could read this for yourself. It says here, Dr. Rudolf Verba, who possessed a doctorate in science and served at the British Medical Research Council, was one of the few escapees from Auschwitz. He had detailed knowledge about the atrocities and the activities of Eichmann, and because of the importance of his Auschwitz statements, which indicated the exact figures of the Auschwitz victims, Judge Moshe Landau, in the Eichmann trial, asked the Attorney General why he did not call this escapee from Auschwitz as a witness. The Attorney General, Mr. Gideon Hausner, answered that the government couldn't cover the travel expenses of its witness. All right? Now keep in mind something here. One thing I want you to notice. The judge was Moshe Landau. That name sound familiar? Does it sound familiar like maybe, well, let's just, I'll save it for later. If you look up the Landau name, you will know what positions of power they're still in today in Israel. Here's what he says, he goes on to say here in the article here. Why didn't the government really call him? The answer might be suggested in Verba's memoirs, published in February 1961 in the London Daily Herald, and that was entitled, I Am a Jew. All right, so you can look it up and see the article for yourself, the very memoirs that Mr. Rudolf Verba, the very man you see pictured here on your screen, and I'm going to, just for the sake of, so we can see who Mr. Rudolf was, because this was a good man, a godly man, a man that cared about the Jewish people. All right, I'll share with you what it says here in his memoirs. It says in the London Daily, I am a Jew. In spite of that, indeed because of that, I accuse certain Jewish leaders of one of the most ghastly deeds of the war. This small group of Quisling knew what was happening to their brethren in Hitler's gas chambers and bought their own lives with the price of silence. Among them was Dr. Kastner, leader of the council which spoke for all Jews of Hungary. While I was a prisoner number 44070 at Auschwitz, the number is still on my arm, I compiled careful statistics of exterminations. I took these terrible statistics with me when I escaped in 1944, and I was able to give them to the Hungarian Zionist leaders. 3 weeks' notice that Eichmann planned to send 1 million of their Jews to his gas chambers. Kastner went to Eichmann and told him, I know of your plans. Spare some of the Jews of my choice and I shall keep quiet. That's what he wrote in his memoir about Mr. Kastner. All right? By the way, some of those Jews that were saved, and they would keep their mouths shut while 800,000 went to their deaths, happened to be Moshe Sharit and Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel, the first Prime Minister, and the second Prime Minister of Israel. Oh, they account him for the saving of 200,000 Jews. Interesting. But they say in this writing on Wikipedia, his due diligence saved 200,000 Jews. But in his own writings, he accuses the Israeli Zionist leaders of sending 800,000 of their people to their deaths by doing nothing about it and keeping quiet while Hitler exterminated them. Eichmann not only agreed, but dressed Kastner up in an SS uniform and took him to Belsen to trace some of his friends. Nor did the sordid bargaining end there. Kastner paid Eichmann several $1,000s. With this little fortune, Eichmann was able to buy his way to freedom when Germany collapsed to set himself up in Argentina. Rabbi Weissmandel, too, refers to Auschwitz Protocol drafted by Verba, a colleague who also escaped from Auschwitz a few weeks before the deportation started. The warning they sent to the Jewish leaders was not published by the Jewish Agency. Moshe Cross sent the full details of Auschwitz to the Jewish Agency's representative in Geneva. Mr. Chaim Posner, who also failed to publish it, 2 Hungarian Jews, George Montello and Joseph Mandel, managed to reveal the facts to the world in the month of July through news agencies. Okay, so that's the only reason anything got known anywhere. Great expense from the United States and Western Europe, yet Mr. Sharit, who lived within a mile of the courtroom, has not been called. But if someone in all innocence of good faith were to examine the documents that were discovered in the archives, a difficult question would still remain. Wiseman's letters to the British government is dated July 6, which means that the letter was written 39 days after receiving the report and proposal from Brand. During these 39 days of negligence, hundreds of thousands of Jews were burned in Auschwitz, 13,000 each day. And by the way, I've been there. I've seen where the crematoriums were at. They destroyed them so that you could not tell how massive they were. They had massive crematoriums at Auschwitz. 2 of them. They were burning night and day. Not like the little ones where you only see a few ovens. These things were monstrosities. You know why they destroyed them? So you couldn't know what they had the capability of doing. In an interview with the correspondent of the Israeli newspaper Maariv on June 1st, 1961, Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris, who served as the chief air officer of the British Bomber Command from 1942 until 1945, stated, "I can't recall that I ever heard of such a plea to bomb Auschwitz. To the best of my reconciliation, I never knew of the existence of a German extermination camps until we liberated Bergen and Belsen. At the close of the war, Prime Minister Winston Churchill also denied ever receiving such a request of the Jewish agency. The Jewish community calmly sits by. It does not come out with demonstrations to move heaven and earth. It does not bombard world opinion with an ununited demand, destroy Auschwitz, save those destined for annihilation. With what is the Yeshuv? Its leaders busy. They are dealing with elections of the Jewish parliament. Mapai alone has held 201 elections, gathering at the time Ben-Gurion and Sharit as totally taken up with energetic participation in the elections. There were more communal elections on July 30th, Ben-Gurion announces. Whoever does not participate in the elections is like a soldier who flees from the battlefront. All are called upon to participate in our battle. The British Colonel Leonard Cheshire admitted to the Daily Telegraph on June 2nd, 1961, that bombing Auschwitz in 1944, although difficult, was feasible had we known that the Jews requested to bomb the place. There would have been no difficulty at all in mobilizing an air group to carry out this task. But you know what? Kastner had already made a deal with Eichmann. In fact, there's another place where Kastner, or Eichmann, the Germans actually said that he made a better SS officer than most Germans. Kastner, the man that made sure the elite of the Jews were escaped while he would turn his back for the rest of them to die. So in Hungary, nearly 1 million Jews were sent to their death. And this man right here, Rudolf Verba, his memoirs indicted them as well. But when you read about him in here, they make it look like they got the message and they put a stop to everything. No. 800,000 of them died. Well, they're probably right, about 200,000 end up being saved, but it wasn't because of Kastner and Sharit and Ben-Gurion. Some of the early leaders of Israel, some of the biggest criminals ever. And yet they would chase down Eichmann. They would do everything they could to bring all these other Germans to trial, rightfully so, while the ones that should be on trial are the ones that are trying to run the nation. It doesn't change, friends. It doesn't change. Guys, keep in mind, I told you there's going to be some sensitive things here. According to Strategic Culture here, they're showing the United States did it again. Its warplanes used white phosphorus munitions in Syria. And by the way, we're just fighting a Middle East war for the sake of some money-hungry deep state money bags that want to make a lot of money and want to broaden another border that really we shouldn't be messing with. The U.S.-led coalition used white phosphorus munitions while delivering airstrikes against the Syrian province of Deir ez-Zor on October the 13th. The attack resulted in civilian casualties last month, and the munitions were also used by 2 U.S. Air Forces F-15s in an attack on the town of Hanin and Deir ez-Zor. The Syrian government has repeatedly condemned the U.S. coalition, which claims that the need to fight ISIS justifies its military actions while denying the fact it was using white phosphorus projectiles. And end up being the civilians end up paying for it. This is the troubling image here. This is to give you an example of what happens to children that are hit by white phosphorus. As you can see, this poor little girl right here, when the white phosphorus hits, it does not stop burning. And it burns all the way down. It says it can even burn right through a bone. I won't keep that on because that's very disturbing. Article also here that I come across here on the Voice of Europe. Young Muslim boys tell a Dutch volunteer, if we dominate here, all of you will be beheaded. This man right down here, he's an elderly man, but he's been teaching the Muslim youth for years, and he was very shocked to hear this statement said to him recently. He's 78 years old. He's done a lot of volunteering and helping teach language to the Muslim youth in Europe. But that was something that really took him off guard. Take anybody off guard, if you ask me. This is something that I really had a feeling it was going to come to this. I knew that we had some Democrats out there saying that the Saudis should really be held accountable for whatever evils that are going on. I know it's all politics as usual. I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. The deep state, the big military-industrial complex is going to do business with whoever's got the deep pockets. Saudi Arabia has those deep pockets, and the road killers or state murderer Riyadh gets benefit of the doubt from Trump where Russia doesn't, is what RT is calling it right there. I was seeing this already as I've been following the death of this Saudi journalist that appears at a consulate office there inside of Turkey. And needless to say, doesn't come back out. I also saw video footage to where a cleanup crew was brought in with a tremendous amount of cleanup gear right after his death that was alleged to have happened there. And I'll tell you something, friends. Turkey talks about trying to point a finger at Saudi Arabia. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the Turkish weren't involved in it as well. But, you know, it's already been kind of made light of, and I'm sure it will be, because they're not going to upset their friends there, which only makes me think about the poor children in Yemen who are dying on a daily basis as a result of all the weapons that we are selling to the Saudis. You know, we could make a lot more money in this nation if we just brought our manufacturing jobs back to the United States and spent more money inside of our own country instead of worried about how many weapons we can sell to another nation out there to go blow someone else up. Or, you know, if you really want to make America great again and everything, you know, since when does Israel really have to have all these billions of dollars in weapons? You know, we could have more peace with our neighbors just by treating our neighbors as ourselves if we did the way Moses did. And, you know, and by the way, God never had to have a big military to go and take care of business and everything. He sent Moses down to Egypt with a stick in his hand, and just 2 guys with 1 stick was able to defeat an entire military. You know, you ever think about that? And to think also that God is going to send his 2 witnesses, and in one place, in the book of Micah, we find out that the people with all their might and power will put their hands over their mouth in awe at the might of just 1 guy with a stick of DNA within him. Because he's a true son of Israel. He is a true child of God. And all their military might won't impress them at all. You know, I always say Israel was supposed to be the light of the world. Not set the world on fire with bombs and make that the light of the world, but to be a light of the world. We have long gone away from what we were called to be. Very, very sad. Bit of troubling news, and then I'm going to give you some good news from Israel. Israeli border police woman arrested on suspicion of shooting a Palestinian for fun. And I will say, in all fairness, she is proclaiming her innocence. I would not want to judge her in public opinion for this, but Haaretz is bringing this out. The Israeli government they arrested her along with 3 others. She is still being detained. According to what it says here, a woman in the border police was arrested Monday on suspicion of shooting a sponge-tipped bullet at a Palestinian man for fun in a near West Bank checkpoint. The incident occurred in May when the policewoman, who is around 20, was on duty near Al-Zaim checkpoint outside of Jerusalem. She allegedly shot the Palestinian for no apparent reason and seriously wounded him. I'll have these and other articles there posted there in the description below so you can read this for yourself. And the thing is, okay, the bullet is not a lethal bullet, but, you know, friends, I know, I had a roommate. He told me about how that they would shoot Palestinians with real bullets. We can't, if we don't clean up our own act at home, nothing will ever change. There will never peace come to the Middle East. Do you think that the Messiah will come and be pleased with the actions of what is going on in our country? Or do you think that the Messiah would come and be pleased to know all the crimes that were committed against the Jewish people when they were in the Holocaust, or the crimes that were committed against those that were in the towers, the Twin Towers at 9/11, when it's exposed for who is really the ones guilty for that crime? Do you know the sinking of the Patria? According to the very book I have right here, this was done in order to put the blame on the British to get a fight going. So they sacrificed. I've got quotes and statements in there. They said the blood of the Jews would grease the wheels of the nation of Israel. I'm blown away. You know, to think that maybe some of my own family could have been spared. I had family in Auschwitz, I had family in Dachau. Some of my own family could have been spared from the Holocaust had the Jewish leaders done something about it, had they really cared about creating a homeland for our people. But it wasn't the case. Now I'll tell you some good news, though, that did happen. There is humanity in Israel because there are good Jewish people. Everywhere there are good Jews. And I do want to say this to the people that are listening, whether you be Christian or Arabic or whatever, always remember there is a sinister minority of leaders in the world and in Israel, not just in Israel, in other places around the world, that for the sake of money and fame and popularity, they will have done and committed some of the worst heinous crimes that could ever be imaginable. But behind that little minority, in every nation on the earth, there is the majority of the people that have good in their heart and that want only the best. This is a report of just such that. A Palestinian baby clings to life after a heart transplant from an Israeli child. You have to understand when you read this article right here, there is no Palestinian children on a waiting list like there is in Israel. Israeli children can be on a waiting list for transplants. That doesn't happen in the Palestinian areas. So it said here in the article, and I want to share some of this with you because it was a beautiful article to see that there is humanity in this world. Regardless of how much inhumanity there is humanity. Palestinian baby remains in critical condition and is fighting for his life in a Tel Aviv hospital after receiving a heart transplant from a Jewish child. The transplant last week marked the first time that a Palestinian baby has received a heart transplant from a Jewish child. Dr. David Mishali, chief surgeon at Sheba Medical Center Pediatric and Congenital Heart Surgery Unit, said in a statement, "The 1-year-old Jewish child died from chronic disease last week at Sheba. Musa, the Palestinian baby, had been sent by doctors from Ramallah Hospital to Sheba's Safra Children's Hospital on several previous occasions to treat and stabilize him. There was several miracles associated with this complicated surgery," Mishali said. "There is no such thing in the Palestinian Authority as an organ donor or organ waiting list. While organ donor and waiting list exist in Israel, there was no Israeli baby on the waiting list. when the Palestinian baby who is called Musa was brought to Sheba in very critical condition. Hang on, it changed on me while I'm trying to read it here. There were okay, here we go. Okay. By a twist of fate, a miracle, Musa was able to receive the new heart from the Jewish child whose parents had agreed a few hours earlier to donate the heart. While Musa also miraculously survived the transplant surgery, his condition is still touch and go, since he was very sick to begin with due to numerous complications. Michelet said in his statement called Sheba, an island, an oasis of peace, where healing is priority and everyone, regardless of who they are, is treated equally with dignity and respect. Musa's grandmother said in a statement that her family would like to meet the family of the Jewish child in the near future and thank them for their generosity. You see, we can live in peace together, and things could be done in a much better way. That's humanity. That's real Jews and real Palestinians that can share love together for one another without all the violence, without all the hatred. Hatred is taught. It's not born within us to be that way. You have to be taught to hate someone. If we would truly do as Moses first said, and Jesus later confirmed it and said, love your neighbor as yourself, we'd have a different Middle East altogether. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. By the way, real quick before I forget to end here, don't forget the conference in Kansas City. Hopefully I'll get a video added to this here to give you a little bit of taste about what will be spoken about in the conference. It'll include information going back the time that I spent with the CIA. We'll be talking about, my wife will be going into 5G transhumanism, as well as some other things there. I won't mention everything that she goes into. And Dr. Pigeon, I need to get from him exactly what all he'll be speaking about, but I know he will. One thing he will be covering is money laundering through churches. Believe it or not, that's a major issue that kind of complements the information that I share as well, because in my own experiences there, I know just how involved political figures are in the money laundering business there and supplying weapons to terrorist organizations around the world. That's one reason why you will always have a cash society until they are done supplying terrorists, because you have to have a means to supply terrorists without a paper trail, and cash is the best way to do it. So if you think the economy is going to falter and your cash dollar will have no value, it won't happen until they're done with what they're planning on doing in the rest of the world. That's including Venezuela, the Middle East, Syria, Iran, Iraq, wherever it may be in the world, Africa, etc. They need cash money to be able to pay these people. And as long as there's cash, they can wage these wars. And they're going to get that cash from selling Americans and other people in other nations drugs and confiscating all your money through those illegal drug sales. And of course, keeping the prisons wealthy as well by making sure they arrest a number of you so that they keep the hotels to max capacity. I will share those things with you. I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Erev Tov.